Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And we're continuing my series of top 10 videos to celebrate the year of 2024. And it's time to talk some books for a change instead of movies, which I do usually. And joining me is one of my best friends and also lover of books, Erin. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. And for those who have seen my videos on my talk show about books, usually it was with Erin. So we're back here to rank our top 10 books that we read in 2024. Because I don't know about you, Erin, but like I don't read a lot of like new releases a whole lot
Mm-mm.
of the time. So, you know, this is more general. It's like what I got through this year. And I think I got around like I think it was like 41 that I got through. I was like really strong at the beginning of the year and then into the summer. And then I barely read anything from like August to December, like the end of November. And I'm like, I was like a couple books short of my goal. I'm like, I was pacing well ahead of it. I'm like, well, time for catch up.
It ebbs and
So
flows.
there you go. But so Erin's going to go through her list 10 to 1, and then I'll go through mine. And hopefully by the end of this episode, you have 20 books to check out. So, Erin, what's your number 10?
Okay. I do have to start by saying my reading year I have to describe as good, not great. I may have
Okay,
struggled to get to pick 10 that were like I even wanted to talk about.
fair.
But okay, my 10th book was Among the Bros by Max Marshall. So I do get a lot of newsletters and I read them every week. And this
Mhm.
came to me through one of my financial newsletters because it's all about, it's like a true story. Um, but it's told kind of almost like it could be fiction, right? But you then realize, based on a true story or is a true story, whatever. It's all about a Xanax drug ring at the College of Charleston. And I don't know if you
Ah,
remember hearing about this in like 2017-ish time frame, but this is like a lot of the main players, main characters in that story. So mostly was just interested because it's fascinating, right? And it came through a financial newsletter because I mean these college frat guys just making hand over fist money, like just crazy. So kind of hard to relate to myself because I am not a college age frat guy. Um, but I just have to say, like, puts you in a different world that you probably wouldn't have otherwise experienced. So,
working at a college, I've met people like that, for sure.
mhm.
And also being an advisor for a fraternity, I would like to think that they're doing good things with their time and but I don't want to know if they're not.
Mm.
So,
We don't ask that
but
many questions.
no, I do not need to know about their personal lives, and stupid college shenanigans. I work with students in academic means, but
Hmm.
this is definitely something very interesting because wild shit happens at colleges, and you know, a fraternity, a drug cartel on a college campus sounds kind of crazy. So definitely seems like an interesting read for sure.
Was very interesting. Glad I read it. Very good. You and I went to the same college too, so I just want to tell everybody that our college was tame, okay? It was not the College of Charleston.
Yeah, we're like plopped in the middle of a neighborhood,
Hmm.
like a suburban Central Jersey neighborhood. There's not a whole lot of shenanigans you can get up to. It's not like we're Rutgers. Um, but Aaron, what's your number nine?
Okay, so number 9, We All Want Impossible Things by Catherine Newman. So she's pretty big right now. I know she just had a book come out, oh, Sandwich, that I am interested in, but her this one, and I anticipate some of her other books, good life story, like good, like just very nice nonfiction. I enjoyed it. Will make you cry. So have to give that disclaimer. It's a
There
good
you go.
cathartic cry. Yeah, I'm like, oh, it's like two best friends. They're in their 40s, I would say now. And one of them has kids. The other one actually has a kid too, but of course, I don't want to say tales all the time, but one of them has cancer and it's just kind of going through that journey and being
Ah,
there for
it's
each
one of
other.
those stories.
Yes. So I'm like, it's gonna make you cry. but just, what it means to show up for people and have your chosen family. And those are always good ones in my book.
I imagine soon to be a Netflix series.
Right.
Because I'm pretty sure I've watched some Netflix series that sounded just like the story.
That's I hate to say tale as old as time, but I'm like, this story's kind of been done a lot, but they're always good reminders, so I'll take it.
Well, and sometimes you need that nice cathartic cry, and maybe in 10 years when we're like, oh crap, we're that in our
Yeah.
40s
Yeah, yeah, no, we're all
in a
like,
different
oh,
way.
so like this is so typical, and then you get there and you're like, yeah, this is so typical. It's my life now.
There you go. How about your number eight?
So number 8 is Trust by Hernan Diaz.
Mhm.
Okay, I was waiting for a second 'cause I was like, if there's any crossover, it might be this one.
I feel like I've heard this one before, so
Yeah, I will say it's a bit of a weird one. I didn't really fully understand what I was reading until the end. But it's basically the same story told through, I think it's 3 different lenses. Like it's told through an assistant finding a diary, it's told through the husband's quote unquote point of view, it's told through the wife's quote unquote point of view. And it's just all about the 1929 stock market crash. So surprise, surprise, I got this also through my financial newsletter.
there you go.
Um, but it's very interesting because it's just all about this one guy kind of pulling all the threads that caused the crash,
Mm.
and kind of just learning about at that time, the ticker taper was slower. So if you put in a lot of orders, like it just slowed down and then it didn't give people time. And it was just very, very interesting. And just many different takes on good, bad people. Were they, just doing it because they could? Were they weird, different? Interesting. I think it won a lot of awards, I'm going to say, and I can kind of see why, because I don't know that a book has been written like this before.
Sounds very interesting. I'm gonna
Mhm.
suggest a business book club
Yeah.
at right. I've already started business movie nights, so might as well just go gung ho making more suggestions.
Hmm.
So we already got a
Love it.
couple. So that's
Yeah.
very interesting. They should just get your financial newsletter.
I
Um,
sent it to
how
you.
about number seven?
So number 7. Um, so you know this. Everyone out there probably doesn't, but I moved this year from Connecticut to Maine. So I live in Portland, Maine now. So I moved in August. I actually got this book maybe a month or two into this year when my boyfriend and I started talking about it. It's called Just Up the Road. And it's by a woman who moved here and then she decided to do 100 adventures in Maine, mostly around Portland, in a year. And she did a blog and then she turned it into a book. So I got the book because I was like, okay, what's going on up here? Like what are we doing? So probably not interesting to a lot of people unless you're going to visit Maine or you live here, but I don't know. I had a lot of
Well,
good.
so you might have to find some ideas. So
Exactly. Exactly. It's good for ideas and yeah, so we'll find stuff to do and it's really cool. But I'll say the biggest thing for me is I love like it's a lot of money, but I love going out to dinner at like farm to table restaurants and it had a lot of
mm,
those in there. So good
very
guide.
nice. There you go. Nice and fresh.
Nice and
No,
fresh.
nothing else. Nothing tastes like. Oh my God, this was just made with like real ingredients
Mhm.
and probably from somebody's farm. My brother took me to this farm when I visited North Carolina for the first time, and I got this bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit sandwich. And I'm like, they just slaughtered this pig. It had to be. It had to happen right before I got here. And just like there's just a different kind of feeling of like, oh my God, this tastes so damn fresh.
Also, I'm just like I like first time I had like a religious experience with food was this year, getting like on a paper plate a grilled cheese with pesto and caramelized onions. I'm never gonna stop talking about it. I'm never. It's just it's up here
There you
now.
go. Well, we're gonna have to find somewhere nice to go check out when we visit them.
Yeah.
How about number six?
Okay. So number 6. Okay, was a poetry book.
Okay.
Called Good Bones by Maggie Smith. Um, if anybody looks her up, you probably will get the poem called Good Bones, which is it's really just talks about how like can't this world, like we have a lot of the good things in this world, like can't we make it beautiful, is kind of the gist of it. And so I got the book. I read a lot of her other poems in there and I loved them. I just, what's nice about a poetry book too is I feel like you can go back to it a lot and reread
Mhm.
it a lot because it doesn't always stick. But yeah, loved that one.
I a friend of mine, Larissa, she's a poet,
Mm.
and I wound up buying like she has a book, and I wound up getting it, and you know, I kind of want to like shake things up a little bit this year in terms of reading because like you're gonna notice I have a kind of kind of a pattern of kinds of books that I read, so maybe I'll have to check out some poetry because honestly, my base experience with poetry is or like Latin epic poems because I took Latin for 5 years. And that's a whole
Still
different other
good.
kind of poetry. So iambic pentameter, so much of it. So I'll have to maybe I'll start there. Get
Yeah,
some good
this is good. And
recommendations from you.
short. They're short, right? You read through it quick. So it's good.
There you go. How about number five?
So number five. Okay, so I am gonna caveat with you started with, oh, I don't read a lot of new releases. And I was like, yeah, yeah, like me either. And then I was like, no, I have new releases on my list, so don't
There you
judge
go.
me. um, God of the Woods by Liz Moore.
Okay.
Very, very good nonfiction. I think it was probably in a lot, if people do a lot of book clubs, it was like one of the top picks over the summer. And it was just very interesting story. Old family money, old family. Their son went missing at this summer camp that they run. And then the daughter goes 13 years later, and then she goes missing. And it's a surprisingly twisty ending. And it's very interesting. And it's one of those books told from a bunch of people's perspective, and it jumps
Interesting.
around a bit on timeline as well. So if anybody's into that, it's a good read for that.
Yeah, because I have Goodreads up as you're talking about them, so I can keep track, and it has that little symbol there, 2024, like People's Choice, I think it was.
Hmm.
Goodreads choice. So hey, you know what? Everybody loves a good mystery and a
Mhm.
crime mystery, and it being a cold case just makes it even 10 times better. So
So
I am not surprised this one struck a nerve, but and always being able to have like have things shaken up and like it's always interesting if you're reading a book that has a lot of different perspectives and narrators and stuff like that. I think the one that I've read in the past couple of years that stood out to me most, which it's the first Game of Thrones book, which
mm.
and that was very interesting, being like, oh, this is actually like told from different characters' perspectives from each chapter and stuff like that. So I told myself I was not going to start that until he actually finished the last book. And then I'm like, got this for $5 at a used bookstore. I'm going to do it. And now I regret it because I'm like, he's never going to finish. And now I'm hooked. But this seems like a very interesting book. So I'm
This
going to
is
have
not that saga, so there you
there you go.
go.
I don't have to get invested, and hopefully that the author finishes their story
Yeah, yeah,
because I'm sure he doesn't get that enough from people online.
yeah. No one's mad at him about it.
Nobody. How about number four?
um, Number four. Oh, another one you just cry at. Oh my God. Okay, so it's called Between Two Kingdoms. It's a memoir of a life interrupted. So that was like the subtitle. And I'm gonna say her name wrong. Sulika Gerard, is her name.
Hmm, I think.
So amazing book, memoir, obviously, just so, so good. But this young woman had her whole life ahead of her, everything. She had just graduated college. She actually moved abroad to take a job. And then she's feeling really run down, really terrible. Came home to the point where her parents were like, oh my God, they were like, did she have a drug problem? Like, what's going on? Like, whatever, right? Turned out she had like a very rare, I want to say bone cancer. Um, so she ended up in and out of the hospital for the next few years, just doing rounds and rounds of radiation or
Hmm.
chemo or surgeries. And she writes about it just start to finish. And it's fascinating and heartbreaking, but just really, really good. And, she was in a relationship and that guy stuck around for a really long time, but it's just the strain of
Mhm.
something like that. So it just does a really good job. I think she's an incredible writer. She's
Okay.
still with us today, so that's good. But yeah, it was very, again, similar almost to the first book I said, Among the Bros,
Mhm.
just a world that unless you're experiencing it, you wouldn't step
Mhm.
into, right? So,
And obviously, and this is a sad thing to acknowledge, but like cancer is becoming a very common thing that a lot of people wind up dealing with. And
mhm.
I'm sure almost everybody has known somebody who's had cancer and dealing with that. And if you could get like a somebody who has such a powerful experience and being able to convey it in an engaging way in a book, that's always a lot
Yeah.
more powerful. And you know, I there's a film that I really enjoy called 50-50, and like that deals with the idea of like, hey, you're in this relationship and like maybe at first you're like, I'm 100% going to be able to handle this and I'm going to be there with you, and it's just like obviously you should not handle it the way that Bryce Dallas Howard's character in 50-50 did. Not so nice. But like that kind of experience is challenging. And
Hmm.
you know, relationships are challenging and being able to make that work. So that sounds like a very powerful book. So
Yeah, so good, so good. So that's why it moved up the list, number 4 for sure.
there you go. Now we're in your top three. So what's number three?
Okay, so number 3, same thing. I think it was released this year. Really. But it was The Women by Kristen Hanna. So Kristen Hanna has put out a lot of books. They're all pretty good. There's a few that are a little more of misses than hits for me.
Hmm.
This was just a hit though. And again, same thing. I think it was probably in a lot of book clubs. A lot of my friends have read it. It was a good discussion point, but it's called The Women because the main character, her brother dies very
Hmm.
early in the book, so I'm not giving much away, dies going in the Vietnam War. So she signs up for the army as a nurse and she goes overseas to Vietnam nurse. And then, so the first half of the book is her experience doing that and going over there. The second half of the book is her coming home and her experience at home. And, you know, it's really, it's hard to look
Hmm.
back like through the lens of history and just realize, we all know that war divided our country, right? But the people serving who thought that they, were serving their country and to come back to what they did, it was just, it's eye opening, it's tough. And then on top of that, her being a woman,
Hmm.
like, to be honest, a lot of people didn't even know women were over there. Like, didn't know that they had put people or like women over there. And so they just were like, oh, you don't have PTSD. You didn't serve. And it's like, so,
Well, when you're a
um,
nurse in a war zone, it's like you see some shit.
oh, she was, yes, yes. And that the whole second half of the book really deals a
Mhm.
lot with that. And it was just, again, fascinating, eye opening, incredibly written, incredibly researched, I think. Like it
Mhm.
was just very, very good.
Well, and I pulled it up here and also another Goodreads choice. So for 2024. And just looking at the cover and like I saw the chopper and I'm like, this is a Vietnam book, isn't it? Because it just invokes that imagery right away.
Yeah.
But this seems really unique because generally, like, what do you think of when you hear, like, you read something about Vietnam or watch a film about Vietnam? It's about the soldiers.
Yeah.
And like your nurse dealing with all kinds of like one, you're over there too,
Hmm.
and you're in the muck, you're in the thick of it, and then just seeing all of the horrific things that happen to people
Oh,
and trying to
awful.
treat them. So this seems like a really interesting perspective to get.
Very, very good. Yeah. Made it to the top 3. So,
There you go. How about number two?
okay. So number 2 was nonfiction, actually.
Okay.
It's called Sisters in Law, and it's by Linda R. Hirschman. And it's actually just about Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg being on the Supreme Court at the same time and being the first 2 women and being of different political ideologies. Um, Incredible. just in, to read, especially in an election year where you start to feel more divided, to read about, some people coming together and, trying to progress, and, not that it's all rosy and everything will be great, but it was very, very nice to see, and really just kind of painted the picture of two incredibly smart women too, to look up to and to be like, wow, they did a lot. They trailblazed. They just did what they had to do to put women in an elevated position. It was, awesome. Just awesome.
Well, and there was a time when people of differing opinions could actually work together.
Oh, that was what I took away. That's like, I
Yes.
knew that, but to just read a story that reinforces that, when you just, I don't know that that's really as prevalent today, or at least doesn't feel like it is. It was just kind of nice,
Well, and what's interesting is like obviously they're two very impactful figures
Hmm.
in the history of our country.
Yeah.
And like the Supreme Court, in terms of like thinking about the three branches of our government, is so impactful
Mm.
because like this is as of now, this is you're there for life unless you step down.
Some of the
And
people that served with them are still there, and you're just like,
maybe they shouldn't be. know, that's
just
a
a
whole other
thought.
conversation today in terms of like why are there like 90-year-old people still doing this?
A lot of questions about
A lot of
random things.
questions. Well, and the amount of impact that you can make being
Hmm.
in a role like that for so long, and also from the perspective of yes, it's the first two women on the Supreme Court coming from very different backgrounds and perspectives. And I would imagine like this book deals in the fact that like what does that mean to each of
Hmm.
them and their experiences. So I think at a time where our country is at where it's at, I think that's a really interesting thing to like take a step back and think about. It's like, people running our government and serving the people don't always have to agree to know that like this is your job is to support the people. So
Yeah.
maybe that is a book you should read in 2025. So there you go.
Yeah, exactly. I will say it was a feel good. So in case anyone's
Very
like,
nice.
ooh.
Well, then what made the top of your list at number one?
Okay, so I mean, I don't know. And there's a few others on here that could have made it to number one. So it's a bit of a whim, but
Mhm.
very interestingly, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue made it to number one by Victoria Schwab. Um, Nonfiction book. Uh, I'll just be honest, this one just stuck with me. I don't know if I can really pinpoint what made it number one, but it stuck with me. I couldn't put it down. Reading, sitting in the car for 5 minutes. I was like, I'm gonna read it.
Mhm.
Just very, I think it's more right because it's a story and it's a good story, but I don't know if it's necessarily an original story, and just well written. I think she just
Mhm.
did a great job. And it's about this girl in France in the 1700s who really, really, really doesn't want to get married. And she calls upon God, but it's the wrong God who comes to answer. And she ends up getting this type of curse put on her, but she lives a really long time. So I won't give away too much,
Yeah,
but until she meets someone, and
interesting.
yeah, love story and all of it. So it's very, very good.
Because like I pulled up the book description, it's like makes a Faustian bargain. I'm like, ooh, spicy, and
Hmm.
and it's just like that's a very interesting like setup for it. And obviously, I'm sure there were a lot of women in her position in the
Hmm.
1700s who did not want to get married
Call
to
upon any god at that point.
yeah. Well, and that's a very interesting thing because it's like on some level it's very relatable. It's like what would you do to
Yes.
try to get out of a situation that you feel like you're stuck in?
Oh,
And
incredible.
it definitely seems like it has some interesting twists in way that it takes on that story and stuff like that. I definitely interested in checking that one out. That seems really interesting.
It's very, very good. But yeah, those were my 10. They were all good. I hope everyone finds something they like on them. Um, But knowing that we have very different reading tastes, I'm so curious about your
Yeah.
10.
So you'll definitely sense some patterns in terms of like a lot of like genre kind of books and stuff like that. But the number one might actually surprise you a little bit, but I absolutely loved it. So my number 10 is Rebel Without a Crew. So this was a gift from Jess, my wife. And it's from director Robert Rodriguez, who made like Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico, or like Spy Kids, um, and stuff like that, like growing up with. And this was actually his diary, his journal, published
Oh,
into a book about him making his first film El Mariachi for $7,000, and it becoming this massive, I think it was Sundance Film Festival hit, and then him befriending like Quentin Tarantino and getting all these opportunities and stuff like that. And I thought it was so interesting from it being from his journal, and from that perspective in terms of its storytelling. And then also, he's a pretty engaging and fun guy to follow around. So, like, he's definitely the kind of director that he's making movies because he's having fun making movies.
you
And
love that.
they're very like B movie kind of like genre flicks, and like because he made his Mexico trilogy, which is El Mariachi, Desperado, Once a Time in Mexico, and they're all like neo westerns set in Mexico that are like big over the top kinds of stories. And it was such a really fascinating, like if you really enjoy things about making movies and stuff like that, this is like a must read.
Mm.
And looking over my list, I read a few books about filmmakers this year, and this was definitely the one that stood out to me the most.
Oh, that's cool. That sounds so good and so cool.
Mhm.
And topic for another time for you and I, but I've been watching, I feel like, more Sundance movies. And so
Mhm.
just to know, like, he probably had one that did a hit, I'm writing it down because I'm just like, this will be,
Well,
that's,
so Jess bought me the physical books, so if you want to borrow it.
yes.
So that one definitely stood out. And also it's Sundance season.
Yes,
So as we're
yes.
recording this, I shelled out my $50 to get the online short film selection, so I get to check those out at the end of the month. I was so close to drop because like we just bought a car, but I really wanted to drop $350 to be able to get 10 online films from Sundance, but I'm just like, not right now. Because like it's a terrible time because like Sundance is at the beginning of our spring semester in college. So like I'm never gonna really be able to do that realistically, but at least I could do some of it from home.
Would be cool
Now,
though.
yes, so my number nine is from great American writer Cormac McCarthy, feel good novelist for sure, very
Sure.
sarcastically. Was Blood Meridian, because like I'm a huge fan of No Country for Old Men and like the film, and I absolutely love the book when I got to read it as well. So I wanted to check out some of his others. I'm a huge fan of The Road too. This
The
is not
road.
quite on that level for me, but trigger warning: his books are dark
Yeah, very,
and
very.
dark. So there's some really messed up stuff here, but it he captures this like American Gothic kind of story and setting. And his writing, his voice is so beautiful while also talking about things so horrifying and disturbing. And it's very like neo Western kinds of stories as well, which I'm a huge fan of Westerns. So, and this was definitely one that, like, after I love The Road so much, which is like apocalyptic Western and No Country for Old Men, I had to read this one. So it definitely hit.
I love that that's on your list because the only one I've read of his is The Road, but probably mostly good and bad. It shows how impactful it was. Also shows maybe why I haven't read another one of his. I'm pretty sure I was depressed for like a month after that.
There's some shit that happened in his books,
Hmm.
which I would probably say from a book standpoint, The Road's probably my favorite of
Yeah.
his. And it's just such an incredibly written story and has so much impact. And to the point where friend Haley has a whole tattoo inspired by The Road, like on her back. And she's tiny. I was there when it happened too. I was
Fun
holding
fact.
her hand and not looking, because I don't do well with needles. But
No.
so my number eight, this is so my wife and I have definitely like jumped headlong into Audible, and we'll
Nice.
listen to books together. And this was one of them. And Jess really likes a good creepy story. And this is a classic, the Amityville Horror.
Oh, I don't know it that well, so you're gonna have to tell me. I've heard of it though.
So basically, it's like this family believes this house is haunted that they moved into, and like this actually happened. Like this story actually happened, whether it actually happened or not, and it was
May
supernatural as a
never
whole
know.
thing. And like the Warrens, who were the characters from The Conjuring, were the ones who one of the investigators into this haunting and stuff like that. And it's creepy.
Yeah.
It like gets up under your skin and stuff like that. There's definitely moments. It was so funny because we were listening it in the car on our drive back from Boston over the summer, and it's just like that creepy feeling just sitting there.
Hope you weren't
Um,
driving at night.
no,
Thank
that would have
God.
been even worse.
Yep.
But no, this is a really effectively written book that just like crawls up under your skin and stuff like that. So definitely would recommend. And it's not the last horror that's going to be on here.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we'll get there. My number seven is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Um, Neil Gaiman has so many interesting books that he's written. I don't know how
It's
many
in my
more he will be
bookcase.
writing. He's in a bit of trouble.
Is he? Oh, I'll look it up after. You don't have to
Yeah,
tell.
spilling some tea now. On our top 10
Mm-hmm.
list. But no, I love mythology. I took Latin for 5 years. I've always been to like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, and all different other kinds of mythology. I even read a book on Celtic mythology this year as well. But
Love
like
that.
Neil Gaiman being Neil Gaiman, and then Norse mythology. And it's very interesting, I unabashedly am a big fan of Marvel and
Mm.
superheroes and stuff like that. And obviously Thor and all of that's based off of Norse mythology. And it was interesting seeing this perspective on actual the actual mythology and stuff like that that's based off of. So combo of Neil Gaiman just being very engaging storyteller and then Norse mythology was really cool. So I enjoyed
I'm
that quite a bit.
writing that one down too because I love mythology. So,
There
and
you
I,
go.
I turned around because I was like, we might even have that on the bookcase. It might be my boyfriend's, but I'll
There you
look.
go. I know, was it Edith Hamilton's mythology, Greek mythology? Like, I
Yes,
remember reading that
those are always
uh,
good.
years ago, and just it's really cool, interesting things, and you know, culture, learning different things
Culture.
about other culture because we're cultured
We're
here.
cultured here.
There we go. My number six. So I was really excited to check this out because I'm a huge fan of. Actually, I'm going to do this. Where is it? So I know the alphabet. I'll figure this out. So I'm a huge fan of Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker, which is a very famous Russian science fiction film. And
Okay.
his approach to the story is very abstract, and it's very loosely based off of Roadside Picnic. So this is a science fiction novel, and the basic idea is aliens came down to Earth and created these zones, and there's a whole new profession called stalkers who sneak people into these zones. And this novel's about a stalker who is dealing with all the politics of it and the mystery of it. It's a really fascinating, it's strange. First off, it's important to know this is very
It's very
strange.
strange.
And if you ever try to watch the film, is even stranger because it's much more abstract and
Mm.
intellectual, high science fiction concept. It takes out a lot of the very human relationship aspects of the book and leaves you more with atmosphere and more philosophical kind of experience. But the book has a lot of It has drama, it has tension, it has suspense, and this person dealing with like such a unique and strange profession in this completely new world. And I swear, Annihilation and like that whole trilogy of books, that author had to be influenced by Roadside Picnic and the film Stalker. And if he wasn't, he had to be indirectly somewhere because it just has. I remember seeing the film, I'm like, wait a minute, this is very stalker coded. And it's interesting like seeing those indirect cultural, because like this is a obviously was like a culturally impactful story and stuff like that, and it's a really interesting sci-fi concept. So, and very Russian,
I'm
so it's
very,
kind of,
I'm very Russian.
the book is very Russian, the movie
Mhm.
is even more Russian. It's a little
That sounds
depressing.
interesting though. That's very
Yeah,
cool. And different culturally, right, too? So you're gonna
mhm,
get kind of some different themes probably.
absolutely. My number five is, like I mentioned, there's going to be more horror on here. I've just been on the biggest Stephen King kick since I've really gotten back into reading the last couple of years, and Jess and I finally tackled Salem's Lot.
Oh.
And what a long read, because like we listened to the audiobook and like
Mhm.
it was like 20 hours.
Is it one of those that's like the size of it, or is it
It's
like,
like 1100 pages.
oh
Yeah.
my, yeah, yeah.
And there's a new film version of Salem's Lot that came out on Max this year. I still need to watch the original like TV miniseries from like I think it was the 70s or at least the 80s when that came out. But this is about the story of a town called Jerusalem's Lot, which like the sign's messed up and it just leaves like the Salem part on it. I'm like, that's why they call it that. But it's such an interesting story of this small town and how this vampire basically takes over the whole entire town. It's eerie, it's creepy, has some really interesting characters. I would pass on the movie that just came out. Wasn't
Okay.
very good, but like
I
that's what you
trust
get.
you for all movie things, so yes, done.
Well, what did you expect when you try to cram a 1100-page book into 2 hours?
Right? It's
It
like, yeah.
basically was like running scene to scene to scene to scene to scene, and it
Mm.
didn't really get like that time to really flesh out. But this is a fascinating, creepy story, and it has a lot of interesting characters. And obviously, you being from New England, it just and now in Stephen King country, up in Maine, it definitely has that like small town Mainer kind of feel to it that so many of his stories do. Would highly recommend. It's definitely up there now. One of my favorite Stephen King stories that I've
Oh,
read.
that's awesome. I think I've read one or two of his books a long time ago, but he's an incredible writer. So I just,
Mm,
and it's nice to always know that it's right there because he has so many books, like a nice backlog. If you're like, I just need something good, pick up
yeah.
Stephen King.
Some of them get a little out there because he did have that period. He was really using a lot of cocaine.
Yes.
And
Feel the
I
writing,
love
Shane. Feel the writing.
I love the Dark Tower saga. Like some of
Yes.
those books get so weird and crazy and out there. Now, the last horror that I have on here is my number four, which is The Exorcist. So
Oh.
I'm a humongous fan of the film, and I've always been interested to check out the book too. And Jess and I listened to this too. I will admit, I do like the film better because
Hmm.
the first chunk of this does get a little bogged down in the weeds of like because the main character is an actress
Mhm.
and it spends a lot of time with her and her colleagues on like this particular project and it's like a big deal which like I appreciate the themes because like she's a woman in Hollywood trying to like direct this film and stuff like that but when it finally gets going and you get into like my daughter's acting weird and acting out and then slowly it's like why is she demonic now and I love this story so much because it's a fascinating parallel between like this is a really powerful story of like a mother feeling completely hopeless to help her child
Mhm.
and that's where the heart of the film comes from and then also the priest whose his whole entire faith has been shaken.
Mm.
And this whole entire experience is like pulling that back in. And this is a haunting and really unnerving story. And I was glad that once it really started getting going, that it met my expectations because, like, I love the film so much. And this happens with me a lot. My biggest hobby is watching movies. I will wind up reading books that are based off of that films have been
Of
based off of and
course.
stuff like
That's like
that.
your, yeah, that's your thing.
It's gonna happen. And I was just really happy that this turned out to be so fantastic.
And I don't know about you. I'd be curious if you ever have this. For me, movie versus book or whatever, what's funny is I would say a good 90% of the time, it's whatever I did first. So if I read the book first, I usually like the book first. If I saw the movie first and then try to read the book, I'm usually like, oh, the movie's better.
Well, I feel like one, you already have those expectations set.
Right. Hmm.
And like, not gonna lie, when I read No Country for Old Men, I could not help but sit there and read. Every chapter started with this little monologue from Sheriff Ed Tom Bell. And like I couldn't help myself but listen to it in Tommy Lee Jones's voice because
Hmm.
like he was just so perfect in the film. And they left one of those monologues at the beginning of the film, and like that richness of his timbre of like the West Texas accent that Tommy Lee Jones does for it. I'm just like, I couldn't let that go.
No.
And it's really hard to push that away. And like I grew up reading a lot. I grew up reading more than watching movies. And there's things like I grew up on Harry Potter. I
Yeah.
read all the Harry Potter books before I saw any of the movies, and I love them both. They're just very different kinds of experiences. And now they're
Yes.
turning into a show so that they
Which I
don't
have.
have to cut so much. But like, too soon.
Been done.
But like, there's generally it's hard to take a book and turn it into a film
It really
because
is. Hmm.
it's a different medium, it's a different version of storytelling. Because it kind of gets boring if you're watching a movie and all you're hearing is the interior narrative of your character unless they make it interesting.
Right.
And also, you have a lot more room to grow with things and ideas in a book than you do in a 90 to say 120-minute film.
Yeah.
So
So true. So true. So much more
just watch.
nuance in a book.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more interesting, like if you get like a short story or a novella that gets turned
Yes.
into a film
Hmm.
because it's a little bit more manageable. But like, there's been so many Stephen King novels that get turned into movies, and there's too many shortcuts in it.
Yes. And I get it, you have to, but yes, 100%.
Well, and that's a challenging thing because makes Stephen King so great is spending the time and really caring.
Yes.
It isn't just the horror of it. It's there's a heart to it and there's a soul to it. And if you're just trying to make like this crazy slasher or scary monster movie and stuff like that, you kind of miss what makes it impactful.
Yeah.
Now, I promise you, the scares are over, but the next two we got some laughs.
Okay.
Um, so number three is A Confederacy of Dunces. So I've wanted to read this book for years because one, I've heard it's like one of those unfilmable kinds of books, which is always interesting. It's like, why is it that? And this is like this satire of this man, this proper Southern gentleman, going through life in this small Southern town and just the hijinks and the ridiculousness and the idiocy that makes up all of these interactions and stuff like that. And like you hate him. Like you hate this guy,
You
but he's so entertaining, and that's the fun part of it.
start to love to hate them.
Yes, and you enjoy laughing at him, and that's the fun part of it. And it's the voice to it is so much fun, and it's such well done satire. And in a time where it's like, I feel like comedy is challenging at this point because like
Hmm.
obviously everybody has a very different sense of humor.
Yes.
And this is the kind of thing where it's just like it's a very sharp clever kind of sense of humor, and I appreciate that. So,
Mm. Love that.
um, my number two. So this is the most recent book that I finished on
Ooh,
here.
okay.
Um, The World According to Kunk, an illustrated history of all world events ever. So, Erin, have you ever heard of Philomena Kunk before?
I don't think so.
So, British comedian Diane Morgan created this character, Philomena Kunk, who's a journalist. And I first saw her, it was what was it? Kunk on Earth. And it was this Netflix series, and she interviews historians and scientists, and she is completely dry, completely serious, and says the silliest, strangest things. And this book is this person, this character, Philomena Kunk, taking us through the history of the world.
Hmm.
And there was some like Jess and I are listening to this, and there was times where like I keeled over laughing because some of the jokes she dared to make.
Oh, we like pushing boundaries. We like it.
Yes, which also she just had a new Netflix special, Kunk on Life, that came out a couple days ago. Oh my god. There's some things that came out of her mouth, and I'm like, I can't believe she just said that.
I'm gonna
And
watch it now. Again, writing it down.
so there's a couple of things. If you search Kunk, Cunk on Netflix, you'll find them.
Okay.
And this what's so hilarious is it's such a meta audio book too, because like it's supposed to be an illustrated history. So like she's this Diane Morgan as Philomena Kunk's voicing the audiobook.
Mhm.
And she's like, and this is where you would see this picture if you were reading a physical book. But since you're listening to it, you just have to deal with it. And like there's like little things like that that add color to the experience.
Yo.
So it's one of those kinds of things where I imagine the audiobook and the reading the physical book have a couple of different kinds of experiences
Yeah.
because she understands what she's doing and playing with that really well. So, and it's just like you actually do learn a thing or two about world history. It's just everything is so twisted. And it's a wide range of play on words, and she makes some racy jokes and also
Love it.
some like it kind of reminds me of how intelligent Monty Python as like a comedy group is, because like they all went to like Oxford and Cambridge. They all have like doctorates and stuff like that. Like they're smart ass
Comedians?
people.
Oh my God,
So
they went
like,
to some of the best schools. It's crazy.
and they have such an interesting background in terms of
Mhm.
like, well, I'm pretty like Terry Jones, one of them. I read his book on medieval life because like he has a whole entire doctorate in medieval studies and like all those kinds of things like that. So you can tell she really knows her stuff and she knows it so well. She knows how to play it for a great laugh. And that's such a fun experience. So, and like, I think it was like a 3 hour audiobook. So it's not even like
Oh, it's not
crazy
that
long or
long.
anything.
Yeah.
You'll regret that it's only 3 hours because then you're just like, God, I remember this.
Love it.
Like it's and she keeps even self-referencing like as we're getting to present time my publisher keeps telling me you need to include this. I'm like, but why? I'm done with this. And like all of this like meta humor is fantastic. And now probably for the most different book on here, my number one is Brooklyn.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but I fell in love with this movie that came out in 2015. It's about a young Irish woman who immigrates to America and is dealing with the transition of being away from her mother and her sister and trying to start this new life. And she's living this boarding home with other like Irish immigrants and young women and stuff like that. And she falls in love with a good Italian guy
Hmm.
from Brooklyn, and her life back home drastically changes because of tragedy. And now she's stuck between, she has this love in the United States, in America, this, um, you know, quiet kind of like kind of traditional blue collar Italian kind of guy. And then back home, where she has this other suitor who's much more refined and much more of an intellectual, and the love for her homeland and just being stuck in this. And I'm like, I hope this book is as good as how much I love this movie. And I loved this book so much.
Oh, I wrote it
And
down. Sounds amazing.
so, one, my wife and I always on Valentine's Day, we plan our Valentine's night. We go to dinner, come home, and we each pick a romantic film.
Mm.
Jess always picks, for the first couple of years, always picked Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which is hilarious, by the
I
way.
love it.
And I would always pick The Princess Bride
Mm.
because true love.
True
Um,
love.
and we tried shaking things up one year. I'm like, I have to pick Brooklyn because like this is my favorite romance. Like
Mm.
if a straight like romantic drama, because it also has that wonderful drama of like Ailish, the main character, dealing with this transition and everything. The period setting is perfect. And I also love Saoirse Sharonan. She's one of my favorite actors.
Love her. I love her.
She's Ailish.
Mm.
So
She,
like
I
I
didn't know if
love this.
English, Irish, what she was. She's also married to the guy who is in Slow Horses.
Oh,
Just so you
lucky
know.
guy. She's my celebrity crush. I love Sarah Sharon.
I love her.
But this book was so good and it was so rich and powerful. And honestly, the movie turned out to be a really great adaptation of this
Mm.
book too, which really made me happy. And like I couldn't put it down because I don't think this book's it's like probably around a little more than 300 pages. So it's not like a super long book, but like I just like burned through it because I'm hooked. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure I read it on a car ride somewhere. I think I read this over the summer because like back in June we were in the car a lot.
Yep.
And I just absolutely love this book. And I don't read a ton of romance
Mm.
books, and I
Well, I'm
don't.
shocked this is your top one.
It's so good. And not gonna lie, this might be part of it too, but it just really reminds me of my grandparents
Oh.
because like my grandfather was the child of two Italian immigrants,
Mhm.
and my grandmother was like English, Irish, and Scottish. And they're both it was okay because at least they were both Catholic.
Mhm.
But like those kinds of connections weren't always very happy. And this is basically like the New York
Mhm.
version of my Philly grandparents story.
Yes. Yes.
And that strikes a particular chord, but like it's such a beautiful book. And
Oh,
I loved it. And Ailish's journey in it's so interesting too, for sure. So, yes, so very unexpectedly between all the horror and science fiction and comedy here, a romance novel came out on top, and it's a great one. So, check out
romance
Brooklyn.
always is on top. It's all right. I love it.
There you go. I figured you'd appreciate that. So,
Oh,
there you go. But Erin, thank you so much for coming on and joining me talking about some of our favorite books that we read in 2024.
anytime. Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Absolutely. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.